Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sullivan, with more than 450 people left dead and a growing body of evidence that Nicaraguan security forces have engaged in torture, including torturing a United States citizen, there's no space left for ambiguity about the reign of violence Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo have unleashed against their own population. So if confirmed, what steps will you personally take to ensure accountability for human rights abuses in Nicaragua?
Thank you for that question, Senator. In my current or my previous job at the U.S. mission to the OAS, I was happy to have participated in our efforts to promote resolutions in the Permanent Council addressing the situation in Nicaragua, including human rights aspects, democratic reform, and I hope that that has increased international pressure on the regime, which I believe we think is one of the key factors in pushing the Nicaraguan government to, first of all, cease the killing, and second of all, address the underlying concerns about democratic institutions that brought people into the streets in the first place. In addition, I have also supported the efforts of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to get on the ground in Nicaragua and carry out what I think has been a very successful mission in verifying the reports of massive human rights violations there. And if confirmed as ambassador, I would certainly continue to work with our colleagues in the U.S. mission to the OAS and provide whatever assistance we can and is required to the various Inter-American Human Rights Commission bodies on the ground.
So is it fair to say that you will, if confirmed, make this a priority of your ambassadorship?
Absolutely, Senator.
Now, let me ask you, Trudeau's government and the European Union have both targeted sanctions measures similar to Global Magnitsky. Will you work with our allies to ensure they join us in deploying this powerful tool, particularly as it relates to the other embassies you'll find yourself on the ground with?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to look at Senator Rubio and my legislation, the Nicaragua Human Rights and Anti-Corruption Act, by any chance?
Yes, I have seen it, Senator.
And do you find elements of that? I mean, I know you can't speak for the department as a whole. I don't expect you to, but do you believe that additional sanctions here could affect the course of the Nicaraguan government's actions moving forward?
Senator, as you know, I'm not in a position to comment on the legislation per se, but on behalf of the department. But I can say, first of all, that if confirmed, I would be happy to continue working with the committee and discussing the application of sanctions on Nicaragua. Sanctions play an essential part in demonstrating our seriousness about our concerns on human rights issues. I'm pleased that we have been able to, using existing authorities, apply a large number of sanctions, both visa sanctions and Global Magnitsky, and I know that additional sanctions are under consideration. So I would be happy to continue working with the committee on that.
All right, fair enough. Now, let me ask you this. I get increasingly concerned that, to piggyback off of Senator Shaheen's comments about Russia's engagement here with Nicaragua, according to various reports, including the Washington Post, Russia has established a new counter-narcotics facility in Managua, has opened a new satellite facility, is alleged to be tampering with telecommunications infrastructure. I would expect that that will be one of your focuses of attention if you are confirmed.
Yes, it will, Senator. As you know, we share your concern about those developments.
Now, to date, the Nicaraguan military at an institutional level has refused to participate in Ortega's government's campaign of violence against its own citizens, which is a good thing. However, they have also failed to defend its own population against the repression carried out by Nicaraguan police and a growing number of paramilitary actors. What's your assessment of the role of the Nicaraguan military to date, and how would you direct our embassy, particularly our defense attaché, to engage with Nicaragua's military?
Thanks for that question, Senator. It's clear that the Nicaraguan military remains an important player in this situation. It has been encouraging that they have not participated actively in the repression that's gone on, but certainly it was striking that even when armed bands were traveling around the country in pickup trucks committing terrible acts of violence, they did not interfere with that. And normally Nicaragua has had a better handle on its own domestic security than some other countries in the region. So clearly there is a role for them to play, and it'll be important to remain engaged with them. We understand that many members of the Nicaraguan military value relationships that they've had for many years with their American colleagues, and I hope that those will pay dividends.
Last question for you. There's widespread evidence that Ortega, his family, and his political allies have plundered Nicaragua's state coffers and have personally profited from the Albaniza accounts funded by the Venezuelan government. One only needs to look at the extensive properties amassed in Costa Rica and Spain by Roberto Rivas, the president of the Nicaraguan Electoral Tribunal, and an individual sanctioned under the Global Magnitsky Act. If confirmed, will you work to address officials in the Ortega government profiting off funds stolen from Nicaraguan citizens?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Palmieri, I don't want you to feel neglected by me, or Ms. Williams, but particularly Mr. Palmieri, for which we have a history. First, this is going to be your first ambassadorial appointment, right? Yes, it is, sir. Well, I'm glad the State Department is finally diversifying. The U.S. government, I'm seriously concerned about Honduras in two ways. Number one, well, I'm concerned in many ways, but let me just focus on two. Strengthening democratic institutions. I appreciate some of what Honduras' president has done. By the same token, I'm worried about other elements of it. And secondly, the end of TPS for Hondurans is going to be a huge challenge if, in fact, that ends up being the last chapter of that issue. So we're going to have a lot of people who are going to get repatriated to Honduras who have U.S. families, U.S. citizen families. So I want to hear how you'll approach, if confirmed, those two issues: strengthening institutions, especially in a country that has a long history here, notwithstanding that we like its president doing certain things, cooperating with us, but by the same token, not being as forceful as I would like to see on strengthening institutions. And secondly, how you'll deal with if that's the last chapter, the repatriation of Hondurans, including U.S. families, to be able to help in that regard and work with them. Give me a sense of that.
Thank you for those questions, Senator. On the first question, the U.S. Congress and American taxpayers have been very generous with foreign assistance in Honduras. We need to make sure those funds are being used effectively, that we're getting the results and the impact on those institutions. We have seen some improvements. The homicide rate has dropped 50% in Honduras since 2011, but the police force needs further reforms to become a more effective, responsive, community-oriented policing force, as an example. With respect to the American citizen family members that may return with TPS beneficiaries who return to Honduras, as the U.S. ambassador, if confirmed, it will be among my most important priorities, the top priority, to assist American citizens, to ensure that each and every one of them has the American citizen documentation that they will need on return to the country, but for the future. And then second, to advocate on their behalf to Honduran government institutions, to ensure that they have educational opportunities, access to health care where appropriate, and I believe our embassy will need to be prepared to assist those Americans as best we can.
I appreciate that. I just hope we can end that chapter in a different way than it is right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.